Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the most divisive American presidents since the Civil War, deliberately waging war on blue states who did not vote for him and punishing them by canceling government projects while invading and intimidating them with ICE thugs and armed military in flagrant disregard of the Posse Comitatus Act. We will get an assessment of what strategies the more successful blue states like California, with an economy the fifth largest in the world, might employ to stop subsidizing red states weaponizing MAGA partisanship. Joining us is David Faris, a professor of political science at Roosevelt University in Chicago and a regular contributor to Slate, The Week, and Newsweek. He's the author of Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics, and most recently, The Kids Are All Left, How Young Voters Will Unite America. We will discuss his latest article at The Nation, How Blue States Can Fight the MAGA Backlash. Then, with much of America waking up to the desecration of the People's House, the White House, which Trump is destroying and distorting by bulldozing the East Wing to build a monument to himself twice as big as the rest of the White House that will be gilded with gold and glitz, forever reminding us of the wretched legacy of the worst president in our nation's history. Joining us to discuss the plutocratic financing of this palace of pretension is Richard Briffault, a professor of legislation at Columbia Law School, where he previously served as vice dean at 3 different times during his career. His research interests include campaign finance reform, government ethics, gerrymandering, election administration, and fair elections. And he's the author of a number of books, including Dollars and Democracy, a blueprint for campaign finance reform. And he is quoted in an article at Time, Who is Paying for Trump's $250 million ballroom and What They Might Get in Return. Then finally, we'll speak with Tamar, Jacoby, the Kyiv-based director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She was a senior writer and justice editor at Newsweek, and before that a deputy editor of the New York Times op-ed page. Now a regular contributor to Forbes.com. She's the author of Displaced, the Ukrainian Refugee Experience. And we will discuss her article at the Washington Monthly, Can Europe Turn Tough Talk on Russia into Action? And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now, David Faris, a professor of political science at Roosevelt University in Chicago and a regular contributor to Slate, The Week, and Newsweek. He's the author of Dissent and Revolution in the Digital Age, Social Media, Blogging, and Activism in Egypt, Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics, and most recently, The Kids Are All Left, How Young Voters Will Unite America. And his latest article in The Nation is How Blue States Can Fight the MAGA Backlash. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Faris.
Good to be with you, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you're in Chicago, and the Supreme Court is about to decide whether Trump can deploy troops on the streets of Chicago in an obvious targeting of a blue state, and particularly a governor who there's a long history of acrimony between Trump and the Pritzkers that go back to the 1970s. They're genuine billionaires. Of course, Trump's only a recent billionaire. Since he's been president, he's made $5 billion. So what's your expectation on how the Supreme Court will rule on this shadow docket?
Well, I mean, you can make a lot of money by just betting that the Supreme Court will do whatever reinforces Republican political party power at the moment. So I have a pretty high expectation that the Supreme Court will defer to Trump under their, ridiculous unitary executive theory that has seemingly taken over all of their rulings as it pertains to the executive branch. So I think that's pretty bad, but it's also, I mean, what's already happening here in Chicago is already quite bad on a day-to-day basis for those of us who live here. So to be honest, the National Guard deployment is more important from like a 30,000 foot perspective in terms of thinking about executive power and democracy and the sort of the daily chaos caused by ICE in our city is the thing that I think is preoccupying most people here right now.
Well, we've never had a president who has deliberately divided the country. I mean, in the way that the Civil War divided the country. And he is absolutely determined to drive a wedge between red and blue states and Democrats and Republicans. And he's picked a bunch of incompetent lowlifes in his cabinet who echo the same kind of poisonous partisanship. It's an extraordinary situation, but do you think, David, that maybe he's just gone a little too far by destroying the east wing of the White House, doing something he promised not to do? And then people are going to wake up to the nightmare that the people's house has been desecrated and that he's planning on building this massive ballroom that will overshadow the main building, the historical White House. And it'll be this monument to this ridiculous, insecure egomaniac's ego.
Yeah, I mean, it's really outrageous what he's doing to the White House. I mean, just even back in July when he had talked about his idea to build this gold-plated ballroom, he had promised that the rest of the White House would not be affected, that nothing would have to be torn down. And then he did it without even telling anybody that he was doing it, right? Like some photos started surfacing on social media of like excavators demolishing parts of the East Wing of the White House. I think it's kind of ironic that the East Wing is where the First Lady operates out of. So I don't know what kind of message that sends to Melania, but certainly the symbolism here is absolutely dreadful for President Trump here. I mean, it sends so many bad signals to the American people, not least of which is the idea that like, I mean, would you do this if you were planning to leave in January 2029? Or is the fact that he's treating the White House like one of his own ridiculous, over the top properties, does that mean that he's planning to run for a third term? And I think that it's not going to affect Americans in their day-to-day lives like the mass deportations are, but I think it's something that can really break through the partisan media echo chambers as ordinary people wake up and see this building that they revere, I think rightly revere, being torn down and altered and, as you say, desecrated by this petty little tyrant. I just this is not going to play well for him, and it's also just another every day there's like like an abuse of power that's much worse than Watergate, and this is just an outrageous usurpation of the process by which the White House is supposed to be remodeled, and it's unbelievable.
But what does it say about the titans of Silicon Valley, the CEOs of Meta and Google, who have put up the money, the 300 million at least for this monstrosity? They're, you know, they're powerful and they're rich, but why are they kowtowing to him? They will suffer the stain of this desecration, and they'll be held to account, I'm sure, by the American people. And after all, they're in business, so you'd think that they would be a little bit concerned about their consumers, as opposed to paying fealty to the dear leader.
Well, I mean, I think unfortunately it seems like they don't care about us at all, right? I mean, I think the lesson of the last few years is that the tech titans in Silicon Valley, are digital overlords, couldn't care less whether the United States is an electoral democracy or not. And that's not surprising because over the past 10 years, we have seen that they don't care about our user experience on even on the apps that they are exploiting us on, right? Like the degradation of the experience of using Amazon.com, of using Facebook, of using Apple. These are all processes that have been going on for a while. What they're doing, Cory Doctorow has written about this. He uses a word for it that I can't repeat on live radio, but it's about making the experience of using these websites worse over time, and making it as bad as you can make it without actually causing people to leave. And I think like once they showed us that they don't care about us as individuals, they don't care about us as customers and as users of their platforms, it really is not that surprising to me at this point that they don't care about us as a people, as a democracy, and that in fact they're all too happy to grease the skids for our slide into autocracy. And I think that this is something that we should all really, really remember if and when we get out of this, that these slime balls are not our friends and are not our allies, and in fact really need to be reined in by the next Democratic administration.
And you have to add to the list of Bezos and Zuckerberg and company, Larry Ellison, who's going to have an enormous influence over the mainstream press now that he owns CBS, or his son does, TikTok, which is where young Americans get their news. And of course, you know, you've written about the notion of the kids are all left, how the young voters will unite America. The one of the most disturbing things is the extent to which young men in this country, the young women tend to be on the left, but the young men seem to be more and more beguiled by these Ben Shapiros and the character that was just assassinated and others. I was just looking at the numbers of all of these right-wing websites and podcasts and the enormous popularity they have amongst young American men. What explains that?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that while young men have moved a bit to the right over the past few election cycles, that young people as a whole, this is largely driven by young women, young people as a whole are still voting like 20 points to the left of the general electorate, and that was true in 2024 as well. So I think we shouldn't overreact to this, but I think it's really, really concerning that one media property after another is being acquired by allies of the MAGA movement, right? This is the Viktor Orban playbook from Hungary, right? Like you gradually buy up all the independent media, you monopolize people's eyeballs and attention with your right-wing slop, and then the election gains follow. I think this is something that the left should have seen coming from miles and miles away. And maybe some of our left-wing allied billionaires should have been buying up these media companies instead of running for president like a bunch of idiots. But that's not what happened, right? And this is where we are. And in terms of why this stuff appeals to young men, again, I think that that's a little bit overstated, but certainly the far right has cultivated this hallucination that young white men are like this put upon class of people that like should be like a protected class or something, that they've been abused by the left-wing elites. And I think most of this stuff doesn't really have much basis in factual reality. But the MAGA movement has, for many years, devoted time, energy, and money to convincing young men that the far right is where their home is, right? And so it's not surprising that they've started to make some gains with the target of that long-term propaganda campaign.
So, what can be done then to overcome the enormous rigging of this next election coming up in next November? Because the Supreme Court, as we talked earlier about what they're going to do in Chicago, they're also, after what we can sort of imply from the oral arguments about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act being eviscerated by John Roberts, whose lifelong career has been to basically create a one-party Republican state in the United States. He's been the best political strategist and operator that the Republicans have had, and his decades-long plan seems to be coming to fruition. And just as it seems that there's a really good chance that the Democrats could pick up the House and stop the MAGA movement, or at least slow it, he's come up with this way to basically get rid of every black representative in the South. This is like the new Jim Crow. They'll pick up about 12 House seats for the Republicans before one vote is cast. So this makes the midterms a heavy lift. So let's talk about, the strategies. What can be done to overcome the tipping of the rigging of the playing field here, and Let's talk about your article, How Blue States Can Fight the MAGA Backlash, because it's more than a backlash. You know, the Supreme Court is about to hand the Republicans a massive gift.
Right. I mean, the Supreme Court at this point, I mean, you just have to think of it as more or less in the pocket of the far right. And so I think everybody expects that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act will be done away with in short order. I think there's some question about whether they'll do it in time for states to be able to rig those 2026 elections. But if so, I think this is something that a lot of people are not thinking about. But like, if you do away with Section 2 of the VRA, there's actually a bunch of blue states that can redraw majority minority districts too. So, like I mean, New York has its own problems in terms of this stuff, but places like Illinois, you just saw this morning that Virginia is planning to redraw their district lines to add a few Democratic seats. So we have some tools in our arsenal to to like kind of reverse gerrymander in response to this. I think it's disappointing and sad that a decade of a pretty successful activism to put nonpartisan redistricting commissions in place in a number of different states are being thrown out the window because Donald Trump and his friends are afraid of losing the election. But that's where we find ourselves, right? Like we cannot have nonpartisan redistricting in blue states while red states gerrymander to within an inch of our lives. Blue states have to think really creatively about how to get around some of the obstacles to redrawing their own district lines prior to November 2026. I think even in a best case scenario, Republicans will be in a better position than they were in 2024, but I don't think it'll be such a towering position that it could withstand a big blue wave, right? And so I think we need to focus on helping to make the president as unpopular as we possibly can in the run up to those elections, so that those independent swing voters, folks who don't pay that much attention to politics normally, are rightfully angry at the president and what they are doing and all the different ways that they are making life in the United States worse for most people. And I think that should be pretty easy if you're a message operative inside the Democratic Party. In terms of like, the president's war on blue states, I've said I think this is the most serious threat to American unity and the union between the states since the Civil War. No one has ever spoken about their fellow citizens like this from the White House. They've never selectively chosen states to take retribution on the basis of who they voted for in the past election. They're selectively enforcing immigration laws in blue states and punishing blue states and rhetorically attacking blue states. And I've thought about this from a number of different angles, and there's some things we can do on the margins to irritate red states. You could charge people more to drive on the Illinois thruway for people from Ohio than people from Minnesota or something, right? But I'm not sure that that's really going to get the job done. And I think there's a lot of chatter. The mayor of Chicago also said this the other day that we need to start planning for a national general strike, something that's really not in the experience of most Americans. But I think that the only thing that can really stop the slide into autocracy in its tracks is a coordinated effort by working people across the United States, public school teachers, federal workers who have some prohibitions on striking, so we'd have to get creative there. But there's ways to get it done. We need to unify people across sectors, across economic classes, across the states. It can't just be in blue states, right? We need a national campaign to shut things down until the president and his allies are willing to listen to reason and to back off some of the things that they're doing. And I've racked my brains, Ian, and I really don't think that there's anything else that can really move the needle in a national sense here.
But just in closing, here in the state of California, we're what, the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. We subsidize Mississippi and Alabama and all these southern states that are getting rid of all of their black legislators and bringing us back to Jim Crow. Is there any way we can stop subsidizing them?
I wish that there were, Ian, a couple months into the Trump administration, I was getting ready to pay my taxes, and I thought to myself, like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I paying my taxes? I mean, they fired half the IRS, and why can't we just do a tax strike? I spoke with a number of tax professionals here in Chicago, kind of just in my personal networks, and they all seem to think that it's pretty unlikely. It would require coordinated individual action, and then you'd have to find a way to pay people back for the penalties that they would incur for frivolous tax returns or for underpaying their taxes. I think once the Trump people get wind of it, that they would actually devote more resources to the IRS and go after us. And unfortunately, the source of the funding disparity between states like California and a state like, I don't know, Alabama, right? Just to pick at random, these are states like California that pay more in federal taxes than they get back in federal spending. That all comes, like most of that comes from individual tax returns. And so lacking a mechanism to halt those outflows of money from the blue states, and I just don't see a mechanism for it. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's a button that even the cleverest blue state governor could push here to cut off that flow of funding to the federal government, short of seceding. And I just, I don't think that we're there yet. And I think that we're going to have to again think about a national labor action of some sort to try to sort of submit a list of demands to the Trump administration that they, you need to stop doing these five things or else we're going to stay up, and we don't care. So
Right.
that's kind of where I am with it.
Well, David, we've run out of time, but I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be here with you.
Well,
Look
thank you
forward
again.
to
I've been speaking with David Faris, who's a professor of political science at Roosevelt University in Chicago and a regular contributor to Slate, The Week, and Newsweek. He's the author of Dissent and Revolution in the Digital Age, Social Media, Blogging, and Activism in Egypt, Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics, and most recently, The Kids Are All Left, How Young Voters Will Unite America. And his latest article in The Nation is How Blue States Can Fight the MAGA Backlash. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back talking about how America is waking up to the desecration of the People's House, the White House, which Trump is destroying and distorting by bulldozing the East Wing to build a monument to himself, twice as big as the rest of the White House, that will be gilded with gold and glitz, forever reminding us of the wretched legacy of the worst president in our nation's history.
That gold and silver will melt away. I'd rather be in a deep, dark grave and know that my poor soul was saved than to live in this world in a house of gold.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Richard Briffault, who is a professor of legislation at Columbia Law School, where he previously served as the vice dean at 3 different times during his career. His research interests include campaign finance reform, government ethics, gerrymandering, election administration, and fair elections. He's also a leading thinker on the new preemption, a critique of states that are increasingly passing ideological laws that override local ordinances. And he's the author of a number of books, including Dollars and Democracy, a blueprint for campaign finance reform. And he has an article at Time, Who is Paying for Trump's $250 million ballroom and What They Might Get in Return. And he's quoted in an article at Time, Who is Paying for Trump's $250 million ballroom and What They Might Get in Return. Welcome to Background Briefing, Richard Briffault.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Richard. And of course, now the price tag is apparently 300 million. So it's pretty much the same tech bros from Silicon Valley, the billionaire bros, who are financing this ballroom. And they all showed up, of course, for the inauguration. So do you think, though, at the end of the day, there's so much outrage about this desecration of the White House, and I'm sure it's going to grow. And the building itself, at least what we've seen of the renditions, are hideous and horrendous. And they're going to dwarf the White House and completely distort this historic people's house forever. This is a growing outrage. So do you think that these tech bros are going to feel the heat of the public?
It's hard to say. Again, my guess is the public will focus more on the precedent and the action and not the money behind it, especially since the money is not paying for the destruction. The money is going to pay for what comes after. So, I mean, it really depends on the way the media coverage goes and the social media. But I think at least initially the focus is on the president and actually the visuals of the wrecking balls smashing into the East Wing.
Well, there'll be no East Wing.
That's true. I mean, maybe the visuals may be over soon.
Right. And what he's planning on building is a 900,000 square foot ballroom. And I think the entire complex is what, 55,000 square feet. So you can just imagine this huge edifice
Yes.
dwarfing the traditional building. And,
And
it
I'm
won't
sure the
have
new
Trump.
building will be named after him. So,
Right. I guess they'll stop short of putting the name Trump on it. But can this be stopped, do you think?
it's really not clear to me how you could. Remember, who is it that sues the president? Who is it that brings lawsuits on behalf of the federal government? The Justice Department? It's his Justice Department. So I'm really not sure who would sue. I mean, there may be some issues, and I don't know the law on this with respect to various the developments, land use developments in the District of Columbia. So it's possible that there might be some local laws that might apply. I don't know the answer to that. But to the extent that he is arguably violating federal law in making these dramatic changes on these historic grounds without proper approvals, it's his Justice Department that would bring the action, and that's not going to happen.
Well, I don't have time to read the entire list of donors. You got Amazon, Apple, Comcast. Of course, he hates NBC and insults the Roberts family, but they're paying up. Google, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Palantir, T-Mobile, the Adelson family, of course, and Harold Hamm, the Lutnick family, Steve Schwartzman, and the Winklevoss twins. So it's quite a number of wealthy individuals and huge corporations. But at the end of the day, do you think, though, this combined with the Arc de Triomphe or the Arc of Trump is going to somehow get people to recognize that this man is, well, to begin with, I think historians, you're not an historian, I know, Richard, but I think historians for the ages will make it clear that Donald Trump is the worst president in America's history, but he will leave behind a massive footprint, will he not?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I guess the only I think the thing that might make this significant is the fact that it is so visual. So much of what he has done is actually hard to wrap your mind around, um, and connect it immediately to him. But I do think people can see this. In terms of the donors, I mean, yeah, it's again, it's consistent with his ongoing practice of using the power of the presidency, the potential of the president to approve or not approve government contracts, the potential of the president to approve or not approve tariff breaks, the potential of the president to approve or not approve new regulations in various areas that make all of these donors have interests that are affected by government actions that makes them willing to be donors. And that I think, and it's again underscores both the way in which these interests are intertwined with the federal government, but in particular the way he's willing to use presidential power to extract, I'm tempted to say extort, favors from people who know that he has power over things that can affect them where it hurts in the bank account.
But he, if you go back to the days of Roy Cohn, who mentored him,
Yeah.
you're a professor of law, Richard. I mean, this guy has contempt for the law. He uses it as a weapon, lawfare as it's called. He lies all the time, and he's lied about this. This is a stealth operation. He said, "Oh, he's not going to touch it, and not going to. It's all going to be fine. I love the White House. I love it. I love it." And he turns around and just desecrates it. This is what's so breathtaking. And then now on top of that, he's asking for $230 million from the Department of Justice to compensate him for what he considers to be the Russia hoax investigations. So he's asking people that he appointed to give him $230 million of taxpayer money. And then, of course, today he pardons the Binance guy who is a part of this crypto scam that him and his family are involved in, that's already brought in a couple of $1 billion from the Gulf and other rich Saudis, etc. So the corruption is in your face.
Yes, I think that's right. And that's what maybe distinguishes him from one of the many things that distinguishes him from other past incidents of government corruption. In the past, they tried to hide it. They tried to explain it. This one is, as you say, in your face. It's in defiance or maybe just in disregard for all of the rules.
So what can the Democrats do apart from complain? I mean, they don't have the power, they don't control the House or the Senate. You can't name and shame him, I don't think. He's pretty shameless. Is there any way? Again, I'm just so appalled by what I'm seeing here. And I've been to the White House, and it's a very modest building, which is, I think, what's really important about it. It's not ostentatious, it's not a palace. It shows, the values of American democracy, that there's only a temporary resident in this building, and people in that building are working. It's an office, and he's trying to turn it into a palace.
Yeah, and it also ties us to our history. I mean, this is well, Washington didn't live there, but Jefferson did, and you're right. It ties us to a more more I'd say small R Republican time in our history when we were a republic and not a monarchy. And right at that, and the president was simply the first citizen and not a king. And it was, as you point out, for a head of state, it was a pretty modest structure. But that was consistent with the view of the president as I say, first citizen and not ruler. He's building, as you point out, he's building a place that's really fit for a ruler.
Right. With the gilded gold fittings and chandeliers and all of the stuff that he's already distorted and changed the Oval Office with. This will be probably on a massive scale of bad taste. But again, I'm thrashing around here, Richard, trying to find a way to stop this desecration of the people's house. I take it that there's not a lot of options.
I think that's right. I think what, what you're doing now, publicity, calling attention to it. I don't know if the Democrats ever get to control one of the houses, public hearings. At that point, it's going to be too late. The place has already been destroyed. Um, it's this is what what is it? Move fast and break things. That's what he's been doing. And it's we can't undo this. But I think through calling attention to it, maybe we can, maybe the public will become sufficiently attentive that future things, not sure what they would be stopped.
But do you think, though, that there's a feeling out there in the country, even particularly amongst independents? I wouldn't count on the MAGA people, but they're a minority. I have a feeling that a lot of people in this country think this is going too far. I mean, you think that shaking down the Department of Justice for $230 million would be going too far, or pardoning the Binance crook.
Yeah.
But but
Yeah,
this is in your face again. This is tearing down a national monument, which is so identified with America.
yes. I mean, this is. I think it's unlikely that this is what the Trump voters thought they were going to get when they voted for him.
Right.
They were looking for a few things, which they may be getting. They've been certainly were looking for somebody to come down hard on immigration. That's happening. They're looking for somebody to address inflation. It's not clear if that's happening. But I don't think they were looking for this.
Right. So if it translates into the polls, that there's a big negative in the polls, and he's already at minus 60%, which is a record, I think, for a president. Is there any way that could get his attention, or is he just so vain and so egotistical that he doesn't care? Or apparently he doesn't realize that he is. I mean, I've talked to people when he first came on the scene back in 2015. I talked to a bunch of Wall Street guys who'd done business with him, and they said this guy's always been in his own world. He's a total egotist in a most flagrant and cheesy kind of way. So this is seems to be the peak of egotistical excess.
Yeah, I mean, I think we in the last what is it? How long has he been president now? 9 months or so. I think the only thing that seems to be able to get his attention effectively is the stock market.
Well, it's taken a slight dip because of oil prices, but I don't see a revolt. If isn't the Wall Street, the stock market being driven by tech stocks, and all these tech titans are the ones that are financing this monstrosity ballroom.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Right.
Well, I think people continue to talk about it, publicize it, point out the law of various legal and ethical issues, but I'm not sure what can actually be done.
Right. But in terms on the legal front, do you think it's likely to get worse with the real possibility that the Supreme Court, I think in the next couple of days, could rule on the shadow docket, for example, to allow troops into Chicago?
Yeah, we will know soon on that. I'm always reluctant to forecast a Supreme Court, but we should have an answer on that very soon.
And then what about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? What's your prediction there? Do you think from the oral arguments, it looks like as though Roberts is quite prepared to strike it down, and that would mean almost a return of Jim Crow. All of the black legislators in the South would lose their seats, and the Republicans would pick up to 10 or even more House seats before one vote is cast in the next year's midterms.
I didn't read the oral argument as quite that negative. There's certainly going to be changes, and I think there's certainly going to be cutting back on the scope of the Voting Rights Act. But I didn't hear that there was going to be an invalidation of it, a striking down of it. Now, it's always dangerous to try and forecast an ultimate decision based on the oral argument. But I heard something a little less drastic.
Well, I'm gratified to hear that. This has been otherwise a kind of depressing moment. So there's a glimmer of hope there. And I thank you for joining us, Richard Briffault.
My pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Richard Briffault, who's a professor of legislation at Columbia Law School, where he previously served as a vice dean at 3 different times during his career. His research interests include campaign finance reform, government ethics, gerrymandering, election administration, and fair elections. And he's also a leading thinker on the new preemption, a critique of states that are increasingly passing ideological laws that override local ordinances. And he's the author of a number of books, including Dollars and Democracy, a blueprint for campaign finance reform. And he's quoted in an article at Time who is paying for Trump's $250 million ballroom and what they might get in return. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back looking into the latest sanctions against Russia and whether Europe can turn tough talk on Russia into action.
That gold and silver will melt away. I'd rather be in a deep, dark grave and know that my poor soul was saved than to live in this world in a house of gold.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Tamar Jacoby, who is the director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She was a senior writer and justice editor at Newsweek, and before that, the deputy editor of the New York Times op-ed page. Now a regular contributor to Forbes.com. She's the author of Displaced, the Ukrainian Refugee Experience, and has an article at the Washington Monthly, Can Europe Turn Tough Talk on Russia into Action? Welcome to Background Briefing, Tamar.
It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And before we get into the tough talk, and Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, was in the Oval Office talking tough, as your title implies. But what do you make of the Trump's sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, the 2 biggest Russian oil companies?
Well, it's very important. It's very important. I mean, the U.S. has been talking about tightening the screws on Russia for a long time, and it's good to see something happen. There has to be more. It's only one step of many that need to be taken to really bring Putin to the point where he sees he can't win, and he feels that the cost of waging the war are higher than the benefits. But it's a step in the right direction, and it's a big step in the right direction. Thank goodness it finally happened.
Well, there's a pattern, though, of Trump being rolled by Putin, and he talks tough and threatens to use the considerable leverage the U.S. has, like Tomahawk missiles, and then he gets a phone call from Putin just before he talks to Zelensky, and Putin turns him around, and then suddenly the Tomahawk missiles disappear. Then there's a summit promised down the line and kicking the can down the road. And then in this case, of course, the promised summit in Budapest is not even happening. So forgive me for
Yeah.
being a little bit skeptical about Trump.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think I think it's the old saying. It really is that Putin is playing him like a violin, and Putin really knows how to play him. And Putin was afraid of the tomahawks, and he called up and he promised Trump a meeting, so that Trump wouldn't send the tomahawks. And then 24 hours later, Putin said no meeting. So, I mean, it's just complete, it's like how many times can you fool Trump on this? Does Trump have some soft spot for Putin? What is it? We don't know. It doesn't really matter. But I think there's going to be limits. Let's all accept there are going to be limits to what Trump is going to be willing to do with Putin. And so, I mean, unfortunately, that leaves it to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And, to the degree they can keep Trump on board to some degree, at least with like the sanctions of today, yesterday, whatever they were actually announced, is good. But let's not expect the moon. And let's not, let's come up with a strategy that doesn't count on that because I don't think America is going to be the one to push Putin into the corner to the point where he's ready to stop. So it's like, let's get America at least doing the minimal, and then Ukraine and Europe are going to have to figure out how to do it. I'm sorry to say.
Right. Well, I don't know whether Trump was concerned about the price in oil and gas at the pump going up. It went up 5% on the global markets. But on the Russian side, there's the usual hysterical hyperbole from Medvedev, the former president and prime minister, threatening World War III. What's your reading there in Kyiv, since you're there? What's going on in Moscow? Are they really
Yeah,
up?
I mean, I think I don't know what's going on in Moscow, right? I'm just speculating like everybody else. But my sense of it is that Putin doesn't really know how much trouble he's in the war. He thinks he hears things are fine. I don't know if he really knows the body count. I mean, the body count, it's 1,000 men a day still. They over the summer offensive, Russia lost, wounded, and killed as many people as live in Salt Lake City. I mean, the numbers are huge. Does Putin really take that in? I mean, I guess he doesn't care, but the damage it's doing to his economy and the fact that, there all of this cost for no significant gain. Like, and Ukraine's not, it's not going to be a great winter. It's going to be cold and dark. And, that's all Putin can claim is some basically civilian terrorism. But he's not getting anywhere. And does he get that? Apparently not. I mean, I don't think he cares about the human suffering or the human cost. Does he get that he's not getting anywhere near achieving his objectives? I don't think so. I think he still thinks the West is going to get tired, that Ukraine is going to finally give and the West is going to get tired. And you know, I don't think there's a serious threat of nuclear. I mean, you can't. It's not something you want to brush off on a supposition. But I don't see anyone else taking seriously a threat that Russians are going to use nukes. What will they do what will Putin do when he really starts to see he can't win by any other means? Will he use some nuke? I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to see what that gets him. I mean, I don't know what he thinks what he's doing now gets him. But so I'm not much afraid of Medvedev's foaming at the mouth. Um, I really think the question is, what is it going to take for Putin to see that this is not helping him at all? I think there's no easy way for him to back down, that's for sure. So that's part of the problem. But I don't think Russia's winning, that's for sure. And I'm not really afraid of them. They can prolong this for a long time and more people can die. But it's not like I'm waiting for them to do something horrible that we haven't thought of yet. They've tried everything horrible they can think of.
Well, how much though? I don't know whether you've heard anything from the Intel people and Budanov and company who really know Russia better than most. Is Putin completely delusional and somewhat crazy about this historical stuff that he keeps going on about, Kievan Rus, the 13th and 14th century? Apparently, he drove drove Trump up the wall in their meeting in Alaska, where he sits down, he starts giving this long, tortured history lesson about the 13th century and all of these weird characters out of the past. It seems to be a total obsession with him. He wrote that
I think
long
it is.
article.
I think it is. And I think it's about the loss of, I think it's, he puts these historical names on it and he can write, he can write essays about it, but it's a broader Russia, and again, I'm not a Russia expert, but it's a broader Russian sense that they were once great and they're not great now. And they're not great now. It's a tiny little economy. I mean, John McCain, it's a gas station with nukes. It's a tiny little economy with some oil reserves, but with oil reserves that it can hardly figure out how to get out of the ground or get the equipment that it needs to extract the oil and the gas. It's totally dependent on the West or on China, and it's not a dynamic economy. It's not a talented economy. There's no AI and none of the dynamism of the American economy. And he's got some big weapons, but they want the past grandeur, and the past grandeur is tied up in territory and power. And I don't think they're ever going to get it back. But dying empires, we've seen this before in history. Dying empires, it takes a long time for them to sort of recognize that they're dying, and they flail about quite a bit. And I think and so his manifestation of the being in the death throes of the empire is all this crazy 13th century history, but it's really about, again, what was once the grandeur of Russia and the power of the Soviet Union that's gone forever, and he's never going to get it back. But that's his sort of life's mission to try.
Well, how much, though, is the economy now being distorted and frail in Russia? Because now their spending for 2026 is jumping up 13% in terms of law enforcement and defense. That's 3.91 trillion rubles, $47 billion extra. Well, that's going to be consuming 38% of Russia's budget, which means that, welfare, education, healthcare, all of that's being diminished. That seems to be an Achilles heel. What are you
It's a
hearing?
huge Achilles heel. It's a huge Achilles heel. It's his biggest Achilles heel. But it only matters to him when the public starts to notice and public starts to resist in some way. And so far the public, I mean, the problem is that the public also has this deep thing about wanting Russian grandeur back and being willing to suffer for the sake of Russian grandeur. I mean, when you read about the Napoleonic Wars and about World War II in Russia, they were proud of how many millions of people died. Like it's the point is we're willing to sacrifice for the grandeur of the whole. And so there's a deep willingness to make sacrifices for the grandeur of the whole, and there's very little way to express dissent. So the country can absorb a lot of economic pain before the economic pain really comes home to haunt him in any way that he cares about. I mean, he doesn't care if people are starving. He only cares if people march in the street and say they don't want him anymore. So I think the economy is seriously hurting, and the question is, can we make it hurt enough so that it really bothers him, so that it comes back to affect him and stuff he cares about by getting people, by making the Russian people unhappy enough. And it's a high bar because for all these reasons.
Right. So, Tamar, let's talk about your article then at the Washington
Something I
Monthly.
actually know something about. Good.
Well, no. Can Europe turn tough talk on Russia into action? Facing the Russian threat with less help from America, the continent forges closer ties to beef up defense. Now, your article indicates that it's not all smooth sailing, right?
So
You give the example of the Future Combat Aircraft System, which was a joint German and French sixth generation fighter, and that's stalled by what, the French
well,
side not liking what the Germans, what's going on there?
So,
They're
well, the
not
French on that story, the French, Spain is in it too. So it's Germany, France, and Spain, and they're supposed to build this amazing modern AI enhanced, fighter jet, and really fighting platform that can control drones and do all kinds of things. And the companies are squabbling. And as I understand it, the French Basically, it was supposed to be sort of a one man, one vote, one country, one vote kind of equal partnership. And the French are basically saying, the French company, right, Dassault, is saying, we're better at this thing. Let us run this part of the project. And the Germans are saying that's not how it's supposed to work. And so the companies have come to loggerheads, and the leaders want them to find a way out of it, but they haven't been able to. And this is important because not only because of this weapon system, but no, I mean, even the big European countries like Germany can't really build, can't rival the US and China in their defense industries alone. The way they can have a rival defense industry and a rival defense buildup is if they do it together as Europe. And that means not just every country doing its own thing and putting it in a pot. We're making armies, right? So they have to have joint planning and joint production and joint procurement. They have to do stuff together. And wisely, the Europeans see that and they're trying to drive this integration of the countries. But these are countries and they all want to do their own thing. And not only the political leaders, but the companies, they don't play well with others. And so, I mean, again, stepping back, making the picture even just a little bigger, since Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe has really woken up and really does realize that Russia is a huge threat. And the sort of, those years when we thought history was over and we could get along with Russia and we should just buy their oil and gas and then they'd like us, that's gone, like that's gone. But Europe hasn't been able to translate that understanding into the unity and the spending that it needs. And they're trying to spend more, but it's hard to find the money. And they promise to spend more, but then they come up with squirrely ways to not really spend more. And they're trying to come together to build weapons, but then it's hard to do it. So they're talking a very good game. And I think it's not just talk, it's not hypocrisy. They know it's existential, it's survival. The smart leaders know that they have to come together and they have to spend more and they have to find the money and they have to do stuff together. But it's hard to do that. And it's about political leadership and political will, right? And it's just
Mm.
it's they're struggling to emerge as a kind of power, and it's still a struggle. And I would say half full, half empty, right?
Right. Well, when you talk about political leadership, though, I imagine that the French aerospace company Dassault, like most people in France, don't think much of Macron. He's kind of a lame duck, isn't he?
That's part of the problem. And companies are companies. And again, just getting cooperation. I mean, the problem is that I think that one of the deepest problems is that for 80 years, the US led Europe, right? When Mark Rutte called Donald Trump daddy, it was sort of awful and everyone around the world cringed. But in some ways, US was daddy to Europe for 80 years. And as one European diplomat said to me the other day, Europe might agree or disagree or be hesitant or whatever, but the US proposed, and then Europe figured out how to do it. And the US is not proposing in the same. I mean, the US is, Trump does propose things, but US leadership to bring these kind of squabbling siblings together is fading. And so how the squabbling siblings, after 80 years of sort of having that habit, are trying to figure out how to get along and be on a team, right? Be on the same team and have that team go in a direction. And that's not easy. And that nobody wants Germany to lead Europe. And nobody, it's hard to lead by committee when you're talking about the military. And it's not going to be France now because France is in a political mess. And it's not going to be England. England's not even part of it anymore. So, how to create a cohesive, effective actor in the defense, industrial, and military realm and geopolitical realm is very hard, game. Building something out of nothing, sort of.
Right. But there's also within the EU's 27 national leaders, you do have a problem with Viktor Orban, who's totally in Putin's pocket.
You have
Uh,
a problem with Orban, and he's got some puppets now. The new Czech prime minister is not going to be anybody's favorite person. It's not going to cooperate, and Slovakia doesn't really cooperate, and God knows what's going to happen if Marine Le Pen wins in France. And so there's the political leadership's falling apart too, but even the ones who agree can't do stuff together. That's the problem. I mean that's it's a problem with many aspects. But even the ones who agree can't have struggle to do stuff together. I mean and you understand why, right? They all have industries, right? So right now they build like four different kinds of main battle tank. They should build one main battle tank. But which big company that makes gazillions of dollars building and selling its main battle tank is going to say, okay, I give up? And I'll cooperate with somebody else and we'll do their project and not mine. I mean, it's very hard. It's a very hard thing to move away from
Right.
without, the wrong kind of leadership that we wouldn't like.
But what are the Europeans doing about Putin's active measures and his hybrid warfare? Because
Oh,
there's
yeah.
sabotage going on, and the
Very
fact.
hard so very important, huge threat. Hard, that's hard for that's the issue there is that it's hard for democracies and rule of law abiding countries to fight with somebody who's playing underhanded, right? So, Europe is not going to go into Russia and distort their elections. And Europe is not going to set fire to shopping malls in Moscow, which is what Moscow does in Warsaw. And Europe's not going to try to assassinate a leader of a defense company in Moscow, which is what Russia has tried to do. So it's the asymmetry is very hard to deal with because Russia's playing, punching below the belt, and Europe won't do that. So, it's trying to do what it can do, which is cooperate, and it's trying to figure out to build a multi-layered drone defense. And it's, sends when Russia sent MiG fighters over Estonia. The Italian jets escorted them out. It sort of worked for the day, like the cooperation that was supposed to work worked. But they don't have a good strategy for how to for how to deal with this asymmetry. And I mean, personally, I think there should be, there are things we can do. We can do cyber attacks on military things. And I mean, I think we should be thinking more about, not just defense, but some gray hybrid war offense. But, people are afraid to do that, and they're afraid of escalation, and they're afraid of, I mean, that's the problem again with the bully. When a bully punches you, do you punch him back? Then what happens?
Right.
And so I mean, I'm not saying they're playing it right, but I'm also not saying I'm not sure how I would do it if I was, czar.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it would seem to me that given that more countries now are joining the pro-Russian camp along with Orban, that Putin would be working overtime with the hybrid warfare toolkit in terms of active measures to influence the politics and to finance right-wing parties, which is what he's been doing in the past.
No
So
kidding.
I,
Yeah.
I imagine that'll be a big part of the strategy. I thank you for joining us, Tamar Jacoby.
Thanks for the opportunity, and it's always nice to talk to you.
And again, I've been speaking with Tamar Jacoby, who's the director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She was a senior writer and justice editor at Newsweek, and before that, the deputy editor of the New York Times op-ed page. She's now a regular contributor to Forbes.com and is the author of Displaced, the Ukrainian Refugee Experience. And she has an article at the Washington Monthly, Can Europe Turn Tough Talk on Russia into Action? And she joined us from Kyiv. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared by 5:30.